Okay, well, tonight's agenda, we'll start with our video. Our video is an hour and 7 minutes long, and that is going to consist of, first of all, an aphid control video. And this aphid control video will be done by Dr. David Trinkline, who is our state specialist with MU Extension. He has a wide array of knowledge in controlling insect pests in high tunnels and enclosed structures. So I think you'll find this information very informative. And then we will go into our video at Millsap Farm. Curtis, would you like to wave at everyone? So with that, I'm going to go ahead and get into the video. And again, thank you for joining us tonight.
My name is Dave Trinkline. I am adjunct associate professor in plant sciences, state extension specialist, as well as the master gardener coordinator, and have spent quite a bit of my extension time helping greenhouse, high tunnel, and other kind of growers with both vegetable as well as ornamental plants. And it's my understanding that the question about aphids has arisen.
Yes.
I'd be happy to give what insight I can in their control. First of all, Kelly, I think it's important to control any insect. We need to know something about its biology. And by that, I mean its reproductive habits and its feeding habits. Aphids in the greenhouse are females that in turn give rise to live females without mating. That process is called parthenogenesis. So this is why you see aphid populations explode almost overnight, because one female aphid can give rise to as many as a dozen young in one day. And it doesn't take too long for those immature females to gain enough maturity to in turn give rise to, again, live females. This happens in the greenhouse or outdoors during summer conditions. During winter conditions, aphids change to egg laying, and it's by eggs that they overwinter outdoors. So indoors, we have a problem in that we have females giving rise to additional females. Now, aphids have very soft exoskeletons. Insects have exoskeletons, while mammals have internal skeletons. And the aphid's exoskeleton is quite soft and prone to drying. This is why outdoors, especially during the heat of a typical Missouri summer, aphids usually aren't that much of a problem, except on maybe a few crops. Frankly, it's just too hot, too windy, and too dry for them to survive. Additionally, it's important to know the feeding habit of the insects we're trying to control, and aphids have piercing and sucking mouth parts, meaning they have a proboscis or feeding apparatus that pierces through the epidermis and gets into the mesophyll cells and starts feeding on cell sap. They're extremely proficient at doing that. So relative to their control, once we have an established population, then we have a real battle on our hands. I would first of all suggest, and of course this is kind of like with the horses already out of the barn, so to speak, but in future high tunnel crops, to try to clean the greenhouse high tunnel as thoroughly as possible between crops. That will hopefully reduce the population. If the high tunnel is not used over the summer, most of them are, but if it's not, then following the high tunnel, rolling down the sides and letting it get really hot during the summer would be a good way to once again reduce the adult population. So at least we're getting a fresh start, or as fresh as we can with regard to the aphid population. So if you will, prevention would be my first step in future crops to try to combat aphids. We're dealing with, though, established populations, and what I assume, if the person is reporting this already, would be a cool season crop, something like the lettuces, spinach, the coal crops, or so forth. And that cool, humid environment of the winter high tunnel is absolutely perfect for aphids to survive because of their soft body. So this means that we're going to have to deal with them in some way to knock down that population. I'll give you a few chemicals that can be tried. Because of their rapid reproductive time, aphids do tend to develop resistances just about as quickly as any insect will develop them. But there are a few insecticides that are aimed at controlling insects with piercing and sucking mouth parts. And what we need to find is something that is labeled for vegetables, assuming the person in question is growing vegetables in a high tunnel. The first one that comes to mind, which has been on the market for quite a while, but still can be effective, is imidacloprid, sold under various brand names, an example being Admire Pro. This can be put down in the soil and taken up by the plant if it's done early enough. If you apply it to the soil, it has a 21-day pre-harvest interval, which if the person in question here is already harvesting lettuce or so forth, we can't do that. When applied as a foliar spray, imidacloprid, again, example Admire Pro, has a 0-day pre-harvest interval. So that means you can literally spray one day and I would wait, but harvest the next. So that's one example. And that happens to be imidacloprid, one of the neonicotinoids. So anything else with that same IRAC number, Insect Resistance Action Committee, IRAC number, and I think it's 4A, you would not be rotating, which is important. A relatively new one that does involve a different mode of action is called Spirotetramat, sold under the brand name exclusively. It's still under patent of Movento. That has a different mode of action. It's in the IRAC category number 23. So it too has I think it's a 1-day pre-harvest interval, post-spray pre-harvest. So it's something that as a foliar spray, you can put on 1 day and harvest the next. Of course, with that saying, we take for granted that good, thorough coverage is important. And when you're dealing with the lettuces and cabbages and things like that, this becomes somewhat of a problem because of the heavy floppy growth. There is one more that could be explored in one of two ways. Azadirachtin is derived from the neem seed. It's not neem oil, but it is derived from the neem seed, which makes it very close to neem oil. Azotin or Azogard are two brand names which you might look for. Those who want to practice or who might be organic certified, MPED, capital M-PEDE, is essentially the new name for insecticidal soap. And it acts by essentially cracking the exoskeleton. Entomologist one told me you can look upon MPED as giving aphids the worst case of dishpan hands you've ever seen. Unfortunately, that's more true during hot weather than during cool weather. So it might give them dishpan hands and cause them to crack, but not to dry out as effectively as during hotter weather. Neem oil is organic certified or MRI approved, and that too does carry the label for aphid control. If we're looking for biologicals, I think the most effective I've seen are members of the genus Aphidius, I think it's pronounced. This is a little wasp-like insect that parasitizes the aphid by laying its eggs in the aphid itself. And very soon you will see kind of a whitish looking mummified aphid, which is not going to do any more harm. Unfortunately, they don't fall off when they die. And if you're picking lettuce that has mummified aphids on it, you're going to have to wash them off, or people are not going to accept that. But that is one of the few biological agents that I have seen to be effective. Ladybird beetles, lacewing, so forth, they give very erratic control. And I've heard of cases where on the first warm day, when people might crack the sides of their high tunnel and they had ladybird beetles in, the ladybird beetles all decided life is better outside and they left. So it is a formidable opponent. Again, trying to start with a clean slate for your next crop would be certainly the way I would begin, and then careful monitoring and applying pesticides as you deem appropriate, depending upon your growing regimen. And by that, I mean organic or non-organic, and going from there. You'll notice I didn't mention any of the synthetic pyrethroids. They really seem to have lost their effectiveness. They are labeled for vegetables, some of them, and for aphid control, but frankly speaking, they're not that effective. And this is why people are shying away from using them and going to some of these newer compounds with rather novel modes of action. Does that help, Kelly? Any questions?
Yeah, so that's great information. One question about the parasitic wasps, the
Yes.
biologicals, so they will survive in the high tunnel in the winter?
Well, it's a very good question you ask. If you clean the plant from debris and start in spring with, as I advocated, a fresh start, you're going to have cleaned out all of your beneficial wasps as well. So you have to reintroduce them. They are not terribly expensive, but very honestly, biological control usually is more expensive than chemical control. What we run into problems is that in certain cases, the biological organism has a longer reproductive time than the pest we're trying to control, and such is the case with aphid. in this little wasp in cool temperatures, which simply means that you have to release more of them to get the job done. During the summer, they might build up populations as fast as, if not faster, than the pest. But since they respond to temperature like all insects do in the reproductive time, they're going to be a bit slow in the late winter, early spring greenhouse, more so than in the summer greenhouse.
Okay, all right. And then I'll just ask you one other question. You mentioned how important it was to do a deep cleaning between crops. And sometimes that's hard with high tunnels because
very
producers want to grow something, you know,
right. And
almost all the time.
Sure.
So could you just mention again some good ways to start with a fresh slate?
Well, even if we follow, let's say, tomatoes, which we plant in the spring and fruit through the summer, and then take out and put in some kind of a cool season crop in the fall, between crops, first of all, clean out all of the debris of the previous crop. And I mean more than just the plants. Rake up the leaves, every little speck of plant material that you can get out would be good preventative maintenance. If you have the luxury of time, following the high tunnel, and this is especially effective during the fall when the temperatures are still fairly warm, for 2 weeks, anything is better than nothing, but following it, and by that we mean nothing in there. You've cleaned out all of the old crop, you roll down the sides and hope for sunny days and let the temperature get real hot inside. But fallowing for 2 weeks in the fall would be about as good as you can do after having cleaned the old crop out totally. That fallowing in the springtime is not quite as effective because the temperatures don't get that high. Folks who might not have a crop in now, but are going to put one in, if they haven't cleaned, by all means clean. And if you're in Columbia, Missouri, it might get down to 12 below zero. Roll up the sides of your high tunnel and hope it gets cold in there enough to damage the insects. That's the problem, in that high tunnels, even though they're not heated, don't get that cold even on a bone-chilling winter's day, because usually the soil is still relatively warm. So the fallowing is more effective in the fall for a winter crop than it is in the winter for a spring crop. But in both cases, thoroughly cleaning out the previous crop and all of the spent plant material that we possibly can find would be good preventative maintenance.
I think that's it, Dr. Trinkline. I will go ahead and stop the recording.
Okay.
And thank you for the information.
My pleasure. Anytime I can help, you know where to get me. Stay warm.
Hi, I'm Kelly McGowan, Field Specialist in Horticulture with University of Missouri Extension. And today we are at the Millsap Farm in Springfield, Missouri with Curtis Millsap. So thank you for letting us come out and talk to you today, Curtis.
Yeah, you bet.
So Curtis, I'm just going to ask you some questions today about the farm. So just share with us whatever you would like. But tell us a little bit about the background of this farm.
Okay. So we started Millsap Farm 13 years ago when we moved here to this location. We had actually dabbled in some farming before that, but 13 years ago we bought this 20 acres, 4 miles north of Springfield, and it had previously been a nursery. The previous owner, Jim Brown, had grown perennials and annuals and a lot of flower six-packs and that kind of stuff. And so there was a big greenhouse already here, and he'd built the house that we live in and a big shop building. And he had actually had at some point a bunch of other cold frames, that we would now call high tunnels, but he had those for several decades, but he kind of sold them off over time. So there were sort of foundation spots left, those kinds of things. But structurally, that was all that was left. But the land had been used agriculturally, and so there was a lot of tillable space, probably more than your average Ozarks hill farm, so to speak. We're on top of a hill here, but we actually have relatively good soils. And we bought it with the idea that we wanted to do mostly CSA, so community supported agriculture. And so we had read a lot about that, thought that was a model that suited us well. We were also doing a lot of pastured poultry at the time. So we were raising, I think we peaked out at around 1,000 broilers a year and 400 or so layers and a couple hundred turkeys. We did that for our first 3 or 4 years that we were here. And then we really just focused in on the vegetables from there on. And so over time, our production space has gone from, I think that first season, we only grew about a half-acre market garden and served about 25 CSA members and went to farmers market every Saturday. In fact, the first year, we went to 5 different farmers markets. Yeah, it was a little much. We didn't know whether we were coming or going sometimes. And then since then, we've grown we actually expanded up to 7 acres of vegetables and then shrunk back down to 2 acres. So we now do 2 acres of vegetables. We serve this summer, it's 2020, COVID really spiked interest in CSA and also squashed all our restaurant sales. So fortunately, we were able to pivot to that CSA. And so we sold about 240 CSA memberships this year. So 240 families that we were feeding. And then we still go to farmers market, just one. Every Saturday from in the mornings, we go to farmers market, the Ozarks, and so proportionally, that's about 2/3 and 1/3 of our produce sales. So 2/3 to CSA, 1/3 to farmers market, and then the rest of our farm income, which is overall produce, is about 75%, and then we do some agritourism, our pizza night, that accounts for another 25%. Early on, we decided we wanted to be a year-round farm. We wanted to grow whatever the weather, because we realized people eat whatever the weather is like. So, and also we'd read Elliott Coleman, Winter Harvest Manual, those kinds of books, and we're really excited about both the possibility and sort of the challenge too of growing under structures. And of course, we had this 60 by 96 greenhouse that Jim Brown had left us as part of the purchase, and so we had an indoor space ready to go, and as soon as we grew in that the first year, we went, well, we want more of these. So that's kind of the evolution of our farm. We're now 13 years in. We started in 2007, and you know, we've reached a point of some stability. We have about so I have a bunch of kids. I have 10 kids, 9 who still live on the farm. And so between my kids and my regular employees, I have about 18 people on payroll. So I have about 9 outside of family staff. And full-time equivalent, worker-wise, on our 2 acres is something around, in the summertime it's about 10, and in the wintertime it shrinks down to about 4 or so. So it varies widely seasonally, but we still do have our core staff that sticks around all winter long. And But when I say that, I want to point out that's the sort of staffing level. This is why we're doing the level of intensity that we do. We have a lot of people helping us, and that means a lot of labor to make really intensive vegetable growing work.
So Curtis, tell us a little bit about marketing in the wintertime.
Yeah. So, initially we realized part of our reason, of course, for doing winter production was we needed sales in the wintertime. We make most of our money in the summer, but it's still helpful to sell stuff in the winter. So we do that 3 different ways historically. Right now 2. We sell to restaurants. Restaurants are great through the late winter. So starting in February or so. Now holidays can be good as well, but then between December and February things are pretty flat in restaurants. But they can they can be a good customer certainly from that February on. They tend to pick up pretty well. And then we do the farmers market. So we're at Farmers Market of the Ozarks every Saturday, year round. We only take 2 weeks a year off, and that's the years that they don't have market, or the weeks, which is Thanksgiving and Christmas. They don't have a market those weeks. And then And then we do CSA as our primary market in the winter as well. And so in the past, I think our first year we did about 25 members in our winter CSA. This winter, we're doing things a little differently. We don't have a CSA from January to March, but our October to December extended season, sort of fall share, is going to be, I think right now we've got about 160 shares signed up. So it's significant.
Yeah.
And we're doing that partly because, I mean, we've shifted our marketing a little bit. We used to do really a year-round CSA where we would have two halves, but we would go right through the winter with the second half. And one thing that we've changed this year and last year is shortening that to a fall season, and then in the January to really it's all the way to the end of April. What we're doing is more of a a la carte online sales system. And the reason for that is we really needed that flexibility. We were running big enough numbers that if we had really cold weather and had things locked down and freeze, then we would be it'd be a problem. Not necessarily that the produce was not there or damaged, but we couldn't get it out of the ground. I mean, if it snows and the row covers are all stuck to the ground, or the tunnels don't get above freezing for several days in a row, then we couldn't get out there and pick enough spinach to fill those orders. So now we can kind of adjust looking at the weather 10 days in advance and say, okay, this is going to be a great harvest week. We're going to offer these things and so on. So we've kind of flexed with time. And the other thing that we really like about that is that gives us more flexibility in our schedule. The CSA is always a hard master. It's a wonderful learning tool because every week you've got those however many people, in our case 250 people, who are going to expect that produce. And so it really teaches you to be a good market grower because every week you better have the produce, so you better do your work to make sure it's there, as opposed to farmers market where you show up light one week, no big deal. But the flip side of that then is you do become kind of really a servant to that CSA. Yeah. And so you don't necessarily take a vacation, you don't necessarily have the flexibility that we get when we do farmers market. And in the summertime, of course, it's not like we can skip a week and just not harvest the tomatoes. But in the wintertime, we can do that with head lettuce and spinach and things, but they're growing slow enough that if we just take a week off, we can pick up the slack the next week and harvest more. Mm-hmm. So that's kind of one of the things we've learned over the last decade plus of doing winter growing, is that at this point we value the flexibility over the maybe more consistent income. And so the winter growing is still a very, very important part of how we get that consistent income. We've just figured out that we can kind of flex how that comes in over time.
Okay.
So Curtis, tell us a little bit about how long you've been doing winter production and some of the things you grow in the winter.
When we got started, I mentioned this before, but we said, well, people eat year round. Why wouldn't we grow food year round, right? And so we really want to do that from the get-go. And so in 2007, we bought the place. We really started farming in earnest in February of 2008. And so that fall, we sold fall and winter CSA shares. At that time, we had the big 6,000 square foot greenhouse. And we also had built that summer a 20 by 100 hoop house. And so between those two structures, and then honestly, one of our most productive little beds, we had a little, I don't remember what we even used for hoops, probably PVC or something. We had a little bitty cold frame structure that we grew salad mix in all winter long. And that was only probably, 6 feet wide and 30 feet long, but it had, that was very productive as well. So we managed to get through our first season growing, the first winter season growing in those structures. And the 6,000 square feet, that's a lot of space, but there's a lot of sidewalks in there. There's a lot of sort of underutilized growing space. So really a lot of the production came out of the high tunnel, the unheated high tunnel, and then that little cold frame. So that was kind of cutting our teeth. And from there, so we'd say, our first season we had 6,000, I guess close to 8,000 square feet under cover. We've really stepped up over the years and grown. So our protected culture now is at about 30,000 square feet. So that's a little more than a quarter of our total production. And all those spaces get used year round, but in the wintertime is when they're completely necessary. We could grow tomatoes and cucumbers in the summer without tunnels, but we probably couldn't grow head lettuce in the winter without tunnels. So that's just kind of the ball has I guess it's snowball. The snow, yeah. Winter growing as snowball. I know. So over the years, though, and as that's happened, we've refined what we grow, and then also expanded what we store, what we grow to store and we've expanded our cold storage, which is sort of part of. It's not exactly winter growing, but the season extension, right? So we now can market sweet potatoes, winter squash, even beets and carrots, things like that we can harvest in the fall, stick them in the coolers, and then pull them out all winter long. And then we do, so as part of that, then of course we needed a market for that. And what we've done, there's the farmers market we attend, farmers market in the Ozarks is year round. And so we are able to go every Saturday. I mean, barring an ice or snow catastrophe, we're able to do that. But that said, it does impact your sales. So the other thing we do is we still have a winter CSA. And that CSA is typically, in the past, it's been around between 50 and 70 members. I think we started our first season with only 25 winter members, but we expanded that pretty quickly. And then this year we're doing it a little different. We're doing an extended season that starts next week and goes till Christmas. And then we don't currently have a CSA scheduled from January to March. Now to us, the high tunnels are more robust structures that are more, they're on better foundations, and we don't deconstruct and move high tunnels regularly. Where we do this, we take this down every 2 years and move it to a new location, which gives us a great soil rotation options. And it also kind of gives us flexibility around a whole lot of things. I mean, if we decide we don't want to use it, we're not lifetime committed to this thing. We can just pull it up the stakes, set it in the corner, and we did that with one of them for a year, not too long ago. So that's nice. Otherwise, it operates very much like the Kittens. So it has this push-up ventilation system all summer long. It's basically just a pavilion. It's all tied up just like this, even a little higher. And so it's just a roof, a clear roof at that point. But then in the wintertime, we drop the sides, and then when the temperatures fluctuate, we've got to be out here being managers of the ventilation. So, big downside of these structures is they do require us to walk the length of both sides of the tunnel on a warm day every time and put it up, and then if it's going to be a cold night, we got to come back and pull it back down. So it turns out to eventually ends up being a lot of time when you add all that up. So that's why I'm excited about the sides. I'll show you here in a minute. But this is pretty typical winter production under something like this. So what we're doing here is, at this point we're kind of at level 3 protection, maybe we'll call it, or 2.5, something like that. So first level was just field with some sort of row cover. Second level were those kitten tunnels, the small ones. And then these give a little more protection. And part of that is because they're bigger volume. So larger volume equals more temperature stability. So the bigger your structure gets, the more temperature it's going to hold at night, and also to some degree, the more effectively it's going to warm up in the daytime. So anyway, the bigger we get, the more variety of crops we can grow in it, because it's going to have better temperature characteristics. So this is a great place to grow Napa cabbage, snapdragons, beets, lettuces, things that we couldn't put out in the field. And putting these things in a kitten would be a little bit less certain. So this is a pretty safe bet with these crops, but in a kitten we would be running a risk of freezing those to death in December probably.
And that's because this is taller?
Yeah, just more volume of air in there gives us a more temperature stable. And then the other thing is, they're a lot easier to work in. I mean, this is, the other tunnel, that little kitten tunnel, if we want to go in there with a machine, you really can't. I mean, there's not enough space to get in there with a tractor or a tiller. We can get in there with a tiller, sort of, but it's still really tight quarters. Where this, we can drive through with our compost spreader, we can drive through with our tractor and do that sort of work, which is nice as well.
How tall is this?
This is 7+, it's almost 8 feet at the peak. That may actually be 8 feet at the peak. There's two, that one is a little bit shorter, I think, it's a little bit taller. 20 foot, actually 21 feet wide, I believe. And we cram production in there. You can see it's pretty tight. There is a path, but when everything's grown up, it's a narrow path. And that's the story of winter production in general, is this covered space is at a premium. So we really shove plants in there and get them, use the bed space fully, and then minimize our path space.
All right, so Curtis, we're in your Caterpillar tunnel. Why don't you tell us a little bit about this?
Okay, so these are the simplest structures we build on the farm. They are made out of one piece of 20-foot long, actually 24-foot long chain link top rail. And that makes a really nice structure. It's about 15.5 feet across. It's 7+ feet high. Not a great structure for growing tall crops, but for short crops that need a little less protection, it's very economical. So this whole structure, including plastic, was under $1,000. So it's a really great cost savings there. So what we're able to do with this, you can see we got some Napa, and here we are the beginning of December, and actually middle of December, and our Napa is still looking really good. Now it will not make it much further. We'll take this out in the next couple weeks because our experience is if we leave it in through January, it eventually gets too cold in these little tunnels and it will get damaged. Here in the middle, we've got some overwintered flowers. So these are flowers like dianthus and some ranunculus and some anemones. And these guys will come up and be blooming middle to end of February. So this is a really these are a great crop for us, a really early bloom that has got just enough protection from frost to preserve the bloom quality, but still be very economical. Now, downsides of these structures, we got hand ventilation. So these tunnels we just shove the sides up, and that's really all we've got as far as ventilation on these. We got a door at each end. Just the doors are enough on really cold days, but as soon as it gets warm at all, we need to be propping the sides up. And that's a hassle because that means that they're constantly falling back down on us. It's kind of part of the nature of the cheapness of the structure is, there's a compromise there. But then again, it does its job pretty well. And then the other thing that's different about these is rather than having hip boards and toe boards like we would have on a regular tunnel, in here we have just kind of a lacing system that goes back and forth across the outside of the plastic to hold it all in place. So it's a much easier to set up and cost effective. It is not always quite as secure as a full-fledged high tunnel or greenhouse structure would be. So there's trade-offs in all this stuff. But again, here we are in 15 by 100, so that's about 1,500 square feet, and we've paid under $1,000 for that. So now we're under $1 a square foot. It's really hard to argue with those economics because we're going to harvest somewhere around $6 to $10 a square foot out of here.
Okay, well, Curtis, we're in an unheated structure right now, so why don't you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so the general nomenclature, it's the differentiation between greenhouse and a high tunnel is that fact that it's unheated, right? So this is a high tunnel we built this summer. We have about 20,000 square feet of high tunnels. This is about 1/10 of our high tunnel space. So what we do with high tunnels that sort of separates it from the greenhouse structure is we grow a lot of cold hardy crops that just need a little bit of protection to make it through winter and stay productive. And some of them, like spinach, like what's under our feet here, that's a little bit of a scraggly spinach bed, but it will survive winter out in the open, but it'll get damaged frequently, and so it won't be marketable. And we put it in the tunnel and even give it a second row cover, and now we can sell it throughout the whole winter, right? And other stuff like the broccoli just would not survive outside we've had a couple of nights of 16 degrees now, and the broccoli outside is showing the damage, and will die sooner or later. Whereas this in here, there's no reason to think it won't go through the whole winter. And then we got this baby lettuce over here. This is actually Salanova, so although it looks baby, this lettuce has been cut twice. So this lettuce has already yielded 30 or 40 pounds of salad mix out of it. So the key things that allow this to happen, it's a single layer of plastic. So if you think about a layer of plastic as a geography lesson, one layer of plastic moves us between 100 and 150 miles south. So we're here in Springfield, Missouri, southwest Missouri. This is like us growing like south of the Arkansas River. It's a much different climate down there. You can grow things there that you just can't grow here through the winter. So that's what one sheet of plastic does. Now, to keep that sheet in place, of course, we got to have a structure. And my favorite structure, and pretty much the industry standard anymore, is pipe, galvanized pipe. In this case, this is one we bent ourselves. So that was one thing that we've learned to do over the years is bend our own hoops. It's pretty economical if you get the kind of mechanics figured out. And so this tunnel is built out of what would really be considered chain link fence top rail. It's a heavier gauge than what we would typically see on a fence, but it's a nice heavy gauge 1 3/8 galvanized pipe that we bent here on the farm. And then the ventilation, which is always key. Any kind of tunnel is going to have good ventilation. The ventilation is just a standard roll-up side. And we've got a double wiggle wire track there as kind of our hip board, and our toe boards are strips of concrete decking. So it's a heavy metal decking that we use there. And that allows us to weed whack or do other sort of maintenance activities right up against the base of the tunnel without messing up our plastic or our strings.
So Curtis, can you tell us a little bit about the cost of something like this?
You bet. Yeah. So this tunnel, now of course we built this one ourselves, so we saved a lot in the fabrication cost there. But overall, the structure of this tunnel cost me right around $2,000 in the materials, and then we built it, ourselves. So if we were building it from scratch, if we were building it from a kit, we would expect to pay something more in the realm of maybe $4 a square foot, which would still make it pretty economical. This is a 2,000 square feet of growing space. So, we'd be looking at about an $8,000 spend to build this 20 by 100 greenhouse. So ventilation, is a big deal. This is the simplest form of ventilation that I know of that, that works on a structural greenhouse. And that is these roll-up sidewalls. There's the right rope. There we go. Let airflow. This is definitely the biggest tunnel we have on the farm. This is a Morgan County model with a lot of Millsap Farm modifications. So we'll come over this way. Okay.
Okay, well Curtis, this is your biggest high tunnel on the farm, and certainly soil health is a consideration inside of an enclosed structure like this, but this is actually a movable tunnel, so you can help to overcome that.
That's exactly it, yeah. So a couple of key features to this tunnel. Just to give the overview, this is a Zimmerman, so it's a 2 3/8 tubes. I think they're 14 gauge, big heavy galvanized tubes. They've got bows every 6 feet. It's a 96 by 34, so it's the widest tunnel they make, that Zimmerman makes. And you can see it's got a truss structure, so that gives it a lot of structural stability. It's got drop-down sidewalls, and I chose the tall sidewalls for that ventilation that we've been talking about. It's so key. And then over here on the edges, if you look down at the base, let's see if we can get to this one, Kelly. You can see where the pipes come down, and rather than being set in the ground, these pipes are actually sitting on a square steel tube. So this is a 2 by 3 steel tube, and I can't remember, I think it's an 1/8 inch wall. It's pretty thick walled anyway. And then we welded little pipe stubs to this that are about this tall, and then we set the hoops over the top of that. So this structure is totally free of the ground. I mean, it rests on the ground, but it's not attached in any way until we drive stakes after we moved it. So we pull the stakes up in the spring, we attach 2 tractors, and we pull it 100 feet that way, and that gives us a whole new batch of soil. And that way we don't worry about diseases building up on our tomatoes and peppers and those kinds of high value crops, even our salad greens. We can do a rotation that in general with greenhouses and structures is a very challenging part of growing. So this is one way to work around that. The structure itself was, I think the kit for this was about $8,000, but then we also spent another close to $2,000 to make it mobile. So, altogether we've got a little more than $10,000 invested in this structure. It's 3,400 square feet. So, somewhere around that $3 a square foot mark, which kind of places it right between the sort of lower end high tunnels that we've built that are stationary and the high end greenhouse where it's, it's non-stationary, but it is also heated and so on. So, but it's a really great structure. You can see right now we're able to grow chard and kale, head lettuce. We've got some baby carrots starting underneath the row cover way over there. We've got a little bit of salad greens. These are the saddest looking salad greens we've grown all year, so don't look closely at these guys. But all this stuff should perform really well all through the winter. One of the keys to this big structure is that with a larger volume, it holds temperature better. It's just a little more stable air mass. And so that really makes a big difference in our ability to grow things through the winter.
So Curtis, I noticed that you have some really beautiful celery plants here under irrigation. Is there any special irrigation considerations for winter production?
Yeah, moisture in the greenhouses in the winter is really an issue. So High moisture will tend to have create a lot of condensation on our plastic, which then will block light. So what we want to do is keep our soils moist, but our air dry. So the best way to do that, in our experience, is to use a lot of drip irrigation. Keeps the water right at the soil level and directly into the soil, rather than if we're sprinkling or if we're misting or things like that, it catches a lot more water into the air. And then the other trick is to just not irrigate as frequently. Of course, we don't need it as often because it's much cooler and we're not transpiring as much. But we just really want to pay attention to our moisture levels. One good rule of thumb is if you're using floating row covers and your row covers are wet each morning, you're running the greenhouse a little bit too wet. So that's kind of a nice way to think of it. Now that doesn't mean we don't use any overhead, but I'm just saying that in general, when we can, we'll choose to do drips instead of overhead in the winter greenhouse.
Okay, so Curtis, one of the benefits of having a heated structure like this is that you can grow things you wouldn't typically be able to grow year round. So do you want to tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so Kelly, here this is our big structural greenhouse, and we do heat it. We have a wood furnace and we also have a propane furnace as our backup heat. So we keep it above freezing all winter. So because of that, we can grow things like this bay tree here, which wouldn't survive outside. It's just a little too cold. We have some fig trees in here. We have all these potted herbs behind us, the perennial herbs, some of which wouldn't survive at all, but all of which wouldn't produce anything in the winter. But by putting them, just keeping it above freezing in here, we can make it produce all winter long, at least to some degree. And then it also makes a really great place to start our seedlings and a lot of that sort of work in the springtime as well. The big difference is just that we add heat. So in this case, it's a wood furnace, which fits our economics and our labor. Because we have a lot of free wood that tree cutters bring us. And then it also, we have that propane backup, so we actually get to sleep, which is a nice nuance that we added about year 7 or so. We realized that we were ready to start sleeping past, it used to be that we'd have to feed the fire at about 11 o'clock, and then again at about 3 o'clock in the morning, and then get up at 5 to feed it again. And now I can feed it at 10 and 5, and I pay a couple $100 a year in propane, and that's a really good deal. Yeah. But otherwise, the structure, it functions like a big, like your standard heated greenhouse, and that is that it's a double layer poly structure. It's a heavy structural steels. I don't worry about this in snow loads at all. It's the highest cost structure. So this thing's, I don't actually haven't priced this one out because this one was here when I got here, but easily $20 a square foot for a structure like this. And so those are the pros and the cons. We can grow things all year round in here that we would not be able to grow outside, but then again, it's more expensive and we do have to provide fuel to keep it hot. So, but it's a great structure for growing things like the herbs. So.
Very good.
So Curtis, you were telling us a little bit about how popular pea shoots have been this year. So do you want to tell us about that?
Sure, yeah, you bet. So pea shoots are a pretty simple thing, but they're pretty undergrown, I feel like. It's one of those sort of sleeper products that people don't think of. So it starts with soaking peas overnight. So these peas were soaked overnight in a bucket of water and then spread. And I think our ratio right now, I think we've been tuning it a little bit this summer. I think we're into about 1.5 cups of pea seeds across this tray. And these are actually big trays. These are paper pot trays, so they're bigger than a 1020, but somewhere in that ballpark of volume. They're really dense. You can see they're touching each other. That's our guideline. The peas need to be touching each other. And you can see these guys are just getting started. These are only been in the tray for a couple of days. And then over here, oh, these guys are stuck down. Look at that. So these guys have been on the seedling table for a little over a week now. Now, normally in the summertime, that would mean they were completely mature. This time of year, with it being a little bit cooler in here, they've slowed down. But you can see they're about, at this point, probably 5 days from harvest. We'll harvest them when they're about this tall. And all we do is to harvest is come in with a knife or scissors, and we just cut it right at the top of the seeds. And then we bag them up, and each of those bags, it's a little bitty bag, and we sell those for $2.50. And it's a really great salad topper. It adds the flavor of peas in a season when you really can't grow peas. Mm-hmm. In fact, we grew pea shoots this summer, all summer long for our CSA, and I think overall sales on that we sold almost $2,000 worth of pea shoots. Wow. Out of no more square footage than you see here. Mm-hmm. So it's a crop that can generate a whole lot of revenue in a very small space. And then the other huge advantage to them is that we can have greens of, of some sort even through August and September if it's hot and dry. The pea shoots, we have to kind of baby them. We have to keep them in a little bit of shade, and we have to make sure they stay nice and wet, but they will come through that and still make these beautiful trays of greens. So that's a big advantage to us, because people never get tired of having greens. We always want to have that on the market table when we can.
Curtis, tell us a little bit about what makes a good seedling starting area.
Yeah, sure. So, and we've gone through many permutations of this over the years, but year 13, here are the things we've learned. One is air circulation is key. So we've got several air, what they call high velocity air circulating fans in here, and those run 24/7. Unless if we have the place wide open in the summer, sometimes we'll turn them off, but certainly in the wintertime we're running them all the time, because we want to keep our, again, that's that humidity thing. We want to keep our moisture down as much as we can, and we want to keep that air circulating so we keep dry foliage, because wet foliage breeds disease. And then speaking of disease, the other thing we've discovered is keeping our soil warm is really key. So this has hydronic heating in it. This means that these little tubes here are full of hot water, and so that'll keep our soil temperatures up in the 60s, even on a really cold night, and in the daytime it may even hit 80 in the soil. And that really makes a big difference. Before we had that, and before we did the fans, we had a lot of damping off issues, but you can see in these seedlings up here with the cilantro and celery, they're really healthy seedlings, no sign of damping off or anything like that. The other real advantage to bottom heat is that it gives you warm roots and cool tops, which means that you get a really vigorous root system, but your tops don't get long and lanky, which, if you don't have good air circulation, if you don't have good bottom heat, then a lot of times the seedlings will stretch out real fast, and then you got these weird lanky things that aren't really that good for planting out. So key issues are, we need to have good air circulation, we need to have warmth in the right places, and then the other thing is water. And so we, a long time ago, figured out that we needed to have some automated water on our seedling table, or we were killing plants. So what we do now is we have an overhead irrigation system that's on a timer, and that does about 90% of my irrigation. I still hand water to sort of top things up, and so that means in the summertime, I need to hand water at least once a day. This time of year, I can get away with usually doing it every 2 or 3 days. But it does give me a little bit of flexibility. Without that, I can't tell you how many seedlings I killed before I got a little bit of automated water. So those are the big three: air, the right temperatures, and water. And when you have those three together, then our experience has been that growing healthy seedlings gets a lot easier. Yeah. Yeah. So that's our product. So that's it's a little more texture, a little better drainage, a lot more nutrients. You don't want high nutrients to start in. There's high salt to cause you all kinds of problems. But once you get those plants going, then you can put quite a bit of nutrient charge in them. For years, I really tried to make all my cuttings work in some sort of media, whether it was soilless or not. And a lot of times I just try and use a potting soil. And that will work for a lot of things, but there's a lot of things that'll just rot on you in potting soil. And figs were one of those that, the success rate in just straight potting soil was a lot lower than it is in something like this. And then there are other plants that, like for example, what was another one that we had a lot of trouble with? Rosemary. Not a huge fan of soil for starting. It does really well in here. So I'm Curtis Millsap of Millsap Farm. We've been farming for 13 years here just north of Springfield, Missouri. We do 2.5 acres of vegetables. And almost everything we grow goes through our cold storage system at some point or another. And that wasn't always the case. Years ago, when we just got started, we did not have any cold storage. When we bought the farm, there was really no storage infrastructure. But it was one of the first things we put in place. And the reason we did that was because we had been convinced by reading lots of farming books and visiting other farmers that unless you have cold storage, when you harvest vegetables, you're only about 12 hours away from having a giant compost heap. Cold storage is what makes the difference between being able to sell and harvest at your time frame versus the time frame that the temperature and climate allow for you. So on our farm, initially, we started with, I think it was a 9x11 cooler, which seemed huge when we built it. It was a monstrous room. And we used a CoolBot with one 220 air conditioner in there. I think it's a 22 22,000 BTU air conditioner, and that kept that room a very nice 35 degrees. We have since, over the years, expanded our cooler space twice. We first went in and just about doubled that 9x11, and then we kind of maximized that space. And then 3 years ago, we came in and rebuilt our coolers with this addition that you see behind me here, which is actually an 11x22 space that is split into 2 coolers. So we now have a warm room and 2 cold rooms. And by a warm room, I mean a 55-degree room. So why did we have done so much expansion? Well, the bottom line is, when we harvest radishes or head lettuce or squash, any of those relatively tender vegetables, especially the cold and crisp ones, if we can get them washed and into the cooler, then they can sit there for up to 2 or 3 weeks. I mean, it really depends on the crop, but if they've never been stressed and we get them cold quickly, they can sit there for 2 weeks and still be sold and be beautiful. Whereas we learned very early on, if you harvest a bunch of radishes and you don't have some way to get it cold very quickly, then within a few hours, everything's wilting, the radish itself is getting soft, and the tops, of course, are wilting as well. So getting things cold, keeping them cold, has really been key to our farm being able to grow beyond what we might be able to harvest in a couple hours and get to market with, and into the realm of things that it may take us all week to build up a big harvest, but then when we go to the farmer's market, we're selling $3,000 worth of produce instead of the maybe $800 that we might be able to harvest in a really short window and get to market with. So it really does make a huge difference, and it's not just for big scale. I mean, we had cold storage from very early on, and I think that any farm that's real serious about growing should consider cold storage one of the necessities of being a market grower. As we come inside, we'll take a look and see the cooling unit. It's a pretty standard cooling unit, just like you'd see in any restaurant or really any produce farm in the country that's not using a CoolBot. This is what's called the evaporator. The condenser is a separate unit, and it's out on the roof of this cooling unit, of this cooler, and operates somewhat independently of the evaporator. But the evaporator is the part that does the cooling work. And like I say, it's been very robust for us. One minor service call, and I really think had I understand more about the system that I probably wouldn't have needed that service call. I could have serviced it myself. Right now we've got this room set to be fairly small, and you can see it's only at this point, I guess, about 10 feet across, maybe even a little less, maybe 8 feet. This wall right here slides. So this is a 3-inch thick piece of blue board, and when we need this room to be bigger, for example, in the summertime when we've got lots and lots of cut flowers, then we can move this wall over and shrink our warm cooler by about 5 or 6 feet and make a big difference in the relative space of each of those. We did that kind of out of necessity because we didn't have the resources and funds at that time to build maybe as big a cooler as we thought we might use, but we like the idea of that flexibility as well, kind of keeping a smaller footprint as practical, because after all, the bigger your footprint, the more walking around and wheeling around and carrying around you got to do. So this has been a good match for us. This is cooler number 1. This is one of our 35-degree coolers. In this cooler, we primarily think of it as our day-use cooler. These are things that are going to go in and out fairly fast. They're going to come in, maybe spend 2 or 3 days here, and then go out to market. We don't have a lot of our long-term storage in here. So for example, this week you can see here we've got a whole bunch of stuff labeled Farmers Market of the Ozarks, FMO, and all this stuff is, this whole wall of produce will be going to market on, actually has been to market on Saturday and will be kind of reprocessed and sent back to market, which is a wonderful freedom to have, the fact that we can actually harvest things, send them to the market once, bring them back, keep them in cold storage for a week, and then take them back to market the next week. Key elements of this system that you'll see, we've got a CoolBot here in the corner. This is a newer version CoolBot up high, the blue light. Down here we've got an older CoolBot. We've been cooling this particular cooler with CoolBots for 13 years and had very few breakdowns. I think we've had to replace our air conditioners twice, but that frankly is probably more of a preventative maintenance issue than it is a result of the CoolBots. But even at that, it's a very inexpensive system to run. The CoolBots cost about $350 to $400. The air conditioners cost about $400. So for less than $1,000, you've got a very robust cooling system that can really be put into any sort of space that's well insulated. The walls here are built out of recycled cooler panels. We were very fortunate to find those our first year of farming. They were tearing down a refrigerated warehouse locally. When we added on a few years later, we used blue foam board, 2-inch blue foam board, and layered 3 layers of it in, and then covered it over with what's called FRP, which is fiberglass reinforced panel. Gives you a nice washable surface. The CoolBots are a great system. We'll talk about the other system we have in the other coolers. Other elements of this system that work, we've got all of our totes are stackable, which makes a really efficient and orderly cooler. We used to joke about playing cooler Jenga, and if your cooler is overcrowded or if you have a bunch of different shapes and sizes of containers, then you end up spending an awful lot of time shuffling things around, which is a really poor use of time. The other thing that keeps us from doing a lot of shuffling is good labeling. So here you can see on this tote, it's White Russian Kale. It's headed for Farmers Market of the Ozarks. It's been on 12/28, and there's 8 bunches in there. Those are the key things we need to know about every tote. This will save us a tremendous amount of time each day when we come in to do inventory, we come in to prepare for a market or anything like that. We don't want to have to dig through 10 totes and move them all out of the way to open each tote to find out what's in there. So having a good labeling system, and these are just real simple. These are the super sticky Post-it notes. We did learn we needed to use the super stickies, not the regulars. Otherwise you end up with your labels all over the ground, which is the opposite of useful and helpful. And the other thing we've learned is it's important to label your totes if you want to get them back. Some of these totes end up going out with CSA shares, and others just end up going to restaurants or things like that. And having them labeled, we get a pretty good return rate. The key elements, having them easily stacked, having them labeled, and then having an organization plan. So in our cooler, over here on the right are things that are going out within the week. Over on our left is our farm stand, which is actually a self-service farm stand. It operates like a retail store. And then we have some shelving for longer term storage, and even a farm use shelf where we have our seconds and things that are really only suitable for being used by farm staff, or things we may give away to volunteers who come out, things like that. But having an organizational plan helps. That way everybody who walks into this cooler with a very small amount of training can know where things belong and how to put them there. So cooler number 3 on our farm is the warm cooler. Of course, when we say warm, we don't mean 80 degrees. We mean about 55 or 60 is where we're going to maintain that temperature. And in our cooler, that's the one where we really wanted to be able to move pallets in and out easily. So we built this door. It is possible to buy pallet-sized doors, but you would think they wanted that it was the whole cooler when you go to price them. These doors about this size seem to be about $2,000. So we thought we could figure it out ourselves, and we did. This is about a 4.5 foot wide door that allows us to easily roll pallets in and out of here. And that's because a lot of the products we're going to store in here come in bulk. So for example, right now we've got, kind of getting to the end of the storage season for us, but we've got some citrus that we bought from Texas, which is a really cool thing to be able to do, and we really can only do it because we can store whole pallets of things. We've got winter squash, 2 bins of winter squash. A month ago we would have had 2 more bins of sweet potatoes stacked on top of those winter squash bins. So there's a lot of storage space in here, and we really can maximize, I guess we can put about 10,000 pounds of produce in here when we're stacking on pallets, and that large door is really key to that. The other thing you can see here is this movable wall, and here we're seeing the other side of it without the shelf in the way. And you can see it's really simple. It's just 2x4s holding these pieces of insulation together. And then what keeps our warm room cool enough is a ductwork fan. So this is a real simple 4-inch ductwork fan over here in the corner that is connected to a thermostat. I learned fairly early in cool storage that high-end thermostats are important. Don't skimp on the thermostats. And so we use an expensive thermostat, a cheap fan, and what that does is that keeps the temperature in here down where we want it. Now, of course, we don't have any heating capacity coming from that other cooler, so our heating capacity comes from 2 things. One is just the fact that we're on the ground here with a large mass, and so this space tends to stay fairly warm, in the wintertime without a lot of manipulation. But we also use a very small, just a tiny little radiant heater over here and that's this guy right here. And it's just one of those oil-filled radiant heaters. Super simple, very reliable, no moving parts, thermostatically controlled. And so what we're doing is we set this just slightly above the temperature we want it to stay in here, and we set that one right at the temperature we want it to stay at. And so they're kind of pushing against each other a little bit, but not enough to be really inefficient. The last thing you want to do, of course, is have your sweet potatoes and winter squash freeze solid. So having a heater is really important. So when we talk about cold storage on the farm, the obvious thing that we think of is produce. But there's other things that need to be kept at the right temperature as well. And one of the big ones for us is seeds. We have a tremendous amount of money tied up in seeds. This shelf of seeds probably represents close to $4,000 worth of seed. And so we want to give it good storage. And what that means for us is keeping it below 60 degrees, keeping the humidity reasonable, so probably under 50% is ideal. And we accomplish that by keeping it in our warm side cooler, so we don't keep it in the real cold. We actually used to do that, and what we noticed was when we kept it in the really cold cooler, when we brought it out to use it, it would condense and it would get moist, and that was a problem. So by keeping it in the 55-degree room, we can kind of keep condensation to a reasonable amount when we bring it out, but it also keeps it cool enough to extend the life of the seed. The other thing that we do to control the humidity is put it in buckets. And so, and in fact, in many of these buckets, we have those silica packs. And anytime we unpack something at the house and it comes with a silica pack, we run down to the seed room and put it in the buckets. And that's just been an easy way for us to keep our humidity pretty low and keep our seed healthy. And with this system, we can get very long lifespans on most of our seed. The only seed that doesn't hold well for us, or two seeds that don't hold well for us, are soybeans and alliums. Any of the leeks, onions don't hold well. But as far as all the others, carrots and lettuce and beans and cucumbers, most of those have multiple year lives, which is really nice. And that way, if you buy a relatively expensive seed, but there's a big break on volume, you can buy seed for 2 or 3 years and feel like you're going to be able to reliably use it in 3 years.
Okay, well, that was some great information. I hope you all enjoyed that. So let's check the chat. Robert, Sean, how are we doing on the chat questions?
Well, Curtis has been doing a pretty good job of keeping up with the live chat, but there was something to expound on the agritourism part of the operation.
Yeah, I can speak to that. Can everybody hear me okay? Kelly, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, super. We, in 2013, I believe it was, maybe 2012, we built some pizza ovens on the farm. And this came about actually from a visit from a guy who's now become a pretty good friend, who was coming to stay on our farm to help us do some volunteer work, really. And he said, wow, I stayed on this really cool place in Wisconsin that was a pizza farm. And they had a pizza oven where once a week, people came out and had pizza out of this oven. And I said, wow, that sounds like such a cool idea. It sounds like a farm party, right? And that's exactly what it is. So it actually, we first heard about that, I think, in about 2008. It took us a few years to find the time to build a pizza oven. They're not expensive to build. They're not hard to build, but they do take time. And so once we built the oven and started kind of practicing on friends and family, and did that, I guess, for about 6 months or so. And the next year, I think that was 2013, we decided that we could start hosting these sort of more open parties. And so what happens right now is people come out every Thursday from May to October. They start at 6 and they stick around usually till around 8 o'clock. So it's about a 2-hour event. We have live music. We have usually a 1 or 2 person band that'll play, and wood-fired pizza out of these ovens. And it's become a pretty serious cash event for us. I mean, in terms of our income. So I think last year we grossed around $65,000 off of pizza night. So that's a big deal. Net is, of course, considerably less than that because there are expenses attached to that. But still, it's a nice piece of our farm income. And I would say too, I would point out that agritourism, whatever form it takes, is somewhat independent of the vagaries of the rest of growing. So, if you have an extra bad aphid year, that it doesn't really matter for pizza night. Nobody cares that the gardens are full of aphids if they're coming out for pizza. Or if you have, in a really hot and dry year, that may stress your growing or whatever the case. The agritourism is somewhat independent of that. At the same time, and kind of by the same token, since our pizza nights are tied to Thursday nights, if we get a series of rainy Thursday nights, we may be out, $9,000 or $10,000 worth of pizza night income in a fairly short order. But again, the vegetables are unlikely to suffer a downturn at the same time. So it works out well, I think, in terms of keeping the farm income balance. Does that answer the question, I think?
I think it does, Curtis. But there's a follow-up question. What can you tell us about the health department and their aspect on pizza nights? Because now it's almost like you're a restaurant, isn't it?
Oh, Robert, don't say that dirty word. We're not a restaurant.
Okay.
So how do we? Yeah. So we tread carefully here. When I got started in the pizza thing, we were going to market, and I talked to my health inspector at the market and said, so here's what we'd like to do. We'd like to have these pizza nights. And the inspector said, well, it sounds like what you're doing is a private party. And I said, okay, what does that mean? And she said, well, it means that, you're going to know the people that are coming, and they're going to be guests of your farm. And I said, okay, well, that's fine. But, if somebody shows up that I don't know, we're hospitable people. We're going to let them in. And I said, just to be clear, we're going to be charging money for this as well. And she said, that's fine. Still sounds like a private party to me. And so we're okay with you doing it. That was in 2013. A few years back, I had a follow-up visit from some health inspectors. And whether it was because of because they decided that I was still exempt, or whether it was the power of prayer, or whatever the case, I have never heard from them since. So that's that's not a very helpful answer, probably, other than to say, so I hold on real loosely to this pizza night thing in terms of knowing that it could go away at some point if I get at some point get an inspector who feels differently about how this should be done. And just to be clear, what I mean by that is I would, at that point, I expect I would have to build an inspected kitchen. I would have to operate things very differently than we do right now. Right now we have 7-year-old barefoot kids rolling pizza dough, and there is no health inspector in the universe who's going to be okay with that scenario. And so that's why when they did come out to talk with me the once, I was very clear about that and said, we just don't have any intention of being a restaurant. We are really a farm throwing a party, and we do it once a month, and once a week, and we do it for 6 months out of the year, and that's what we are. We don't have any intention to be anything different. So if that's the case, then we would have to shut it down and do something different.
Very good. I think that answers it, because it's basically a customer appreciation event, right? Rather than a restaurant kind of a thing. Yeah.
That was how they chose to see it. Yes. One more nuance to that I think is maybe significant, and that is we've always called it Pizza Club. We've been very intentional about keeping member rosters, and we talk about people who come to Pizza Club are Pizza Club members. Now, whether that really has any bearing in the health department's view, I don't know, but I do know that there are lots and lots of those kind of odd little corners of the law, places like I think of the Eagles Club or Lions Club, places like that, where they do something similar to what we're doing, and oftentimes those places are underneath the health. They're exempt from health department regulations. I should also be clear. We still try and run a really clean ship. When I talk about 7-year-olds rolling dough, it's going to go through an 800-degree oven, and even at that, we're keeping a really close eye. Of course, we don't want to make anybody sick, and that is the last thing we ever want to do. So I'm not trying to be blasé about it, but I do recognize that there's just some things that are probably okay with the vast majority of us as farmers that are maybe not okay with someone whose whole career is built around preventing germs. So
sure. So if someone else is considering that, the health department that does those inspections is actually county dependent, and it's independent, every county's different. So you'd have to check with your own, start building a good relationship now, if you're gonna
That's
do
right.
something like that.
Yes. Make
Okay,
friends.
and yes, and that's always helpful.
Yeah.
One other question in the chat is, when will you be starting your pizza nights again?
We go from May to October. So we usually start the first Thursday in May. And of course, it's weather dependent. We are totally an outside venue. Part of keeping a loose handle on this, I mean, holding loosely to this, is we have really not invested very much in infrastructure. Kind of the next step, if we were to decide to be more serious about it, would be to build some sort of big structure that could keep people undercover. But we're running around 200 to 250 guests every Thursday night. So it has to be a pretty dry and rained out a number of times. But yeah, so all that to say, May to October, every Thursday. Occasionally we'll move it a day back or even 2 days back to try and avoid a rainy day.
Okay, so we're caught up in the chat, Kelly.
Okay. Any last questions? Let's take one more question. Oh, internships. You want to talk about that?
Yeah, I'd share. And for that matter, other educational opportunities too. But we have hosted interns right from the beginning of our farm. And frankly, in retrospect, that was pretty presumptuous of us to host interns our first year of farming and pretend like we had something to teach. I'm sure that the two young men who interned with me that first year learned a lot, but I don't think it was necessarily about farming. I think it was more about things they don't want to do in the future. Both of them quit in mid-July. So, yeah, we've always had learners on the farm. And so nowadays we typically host 2 on-farm interns. And those people live on farm and are part of farm life, day in, day out. And they earn a stipend and room and board, which is together equivalent to minimum wage. And then they're working beside us day in and day out. So it's a really good opportunity to learn how the farm works. I try and be very intentional about providing educational time for them, including sitting down. We read through the Market Farmer, Market Gardener, the J.M. Fortier book together and talk through it chapter after chapter. Which kind of gives us a framework to talk about how our farm works, similarities and differences to other farms and so on. We also give them an opportunity to exchange with other farms, so they can go and spend time on, say, Liz Greisnack's farm, or they may go to the goat dairy and spend a week with them, or a couple of weeks, or we've got some friends who do pastured poultry and those kinds of things. So there's opportunities for them to expand beyond our farm, even during their time here. And I think that's really important. Honestly, the intern thing is a little contentious in the market grower world right now, because some people say, oh, it's a way of getting cheap labor. And the counter argument to that, and the argument that I generally agree with, is, well, wait until you have interns and then you can tell me how it's all, cheap labor. I take my duty to educate them very seriously. And so I'm very intentional about not treating them like my hourly workers, who I don't, my job for hourly workers is different. They're to show up and do their work, and I'm going to train them to the degree that it's beneficial to the farm, but I'm not going to spend a whole lot of extra time sitting with them, discussing things, taking time out of the rest of the workday to educate them. So interns are a serious commitment, but we love doing it. And if you know somebody who wants to intern or would be interested, we also do some part-time internships, or really they're more volunteer time. So people who come out and spend time with us during the week, everything from a morning or an afternoon a week to a couple days a week. And that's a really great way. If you think this is something you want to do, whether it's my farm or some other farm, find a farmer who is doing what you want to do and convince them that you can help them. And most of us are pretty amicable to that. If you can convince them that you're not going to be in the way, that you're actually going to be helpful, then that's a tremendous way to learn, because being alongside somebody who's getting the work done and seeing that from the inside is a really powerful way to figure out whether it's for you and figure out whether it's and get down to the details too, not just whether the whole thing is for you, but then when do we plant the carrots, how do we plant the carrots, how do we weed the carrots, how do they get harvested and washed and so on. Some of those things are just best learned by doing them.
Absolutely. Okay, well, thank you very much, Curtis. This was awesome. If someone wants to get a hold of you, could you remind everyone what your email address is?
Yeah, you bet. It's millsapfarms@gmail.com. And I'm always glad to answer emails. And I may be a little slow on it. Don't feel bad about sending me another email if you need to. I won't be offended if you won't be, because I am super busy, and the desk is typically the last place that I end up in a day. So, but I'm always glad to share what we know. And then also if you're local, coming and seeing us is always a good way to get information as well. So.
Well, very good. Well, I am going to close this out by reminding everyone to take the evaluation, please, before you leave. And then I am going to put, get this up here. So this is the contact information for all of us. If you ever have questions about anything, don't hesitate to reach out to us. We are here to help you in your farming operations, so please do so. And I also want to remind everyone that we will be having a tomato school May 20th and 21st at the Southwest Research Center in Mount Vernon. Registration information will be up on the Webb City Farmers Market website page in the next few days. So if you're interested, go to that website and check on that. And then the recordings of tonight and the other sessions will also be on the Webb City Farmers Market website page under the training section. So go there as well, and you can get all of the recordings from all of this. So with that, thank you for joining us. Hopefully we can do it in person next year, and thank you. Have a good evening.